not ever forget the reason for the season. Glad to be with you here on the Weekly Law Roundup here tonight from 6 to 7 and even every Tuesday night from 6 to 7. Got a fantastic guest, a gentleman with a lot of energy and a lot of things to talk to us about. We got Brandon Burley. Welcome, buddy.
Thank you.
I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, here at the Weekly Law Roundup, we try to bring you a myriad of guests and folks from different elements of society and different segments of society, and folks that basically can transcend everything. And Brandon's one of the ones that can do it. He's been involved in law enforcement for a number of years. He works down at Concord Christian School and is very involved there, as well as in another of other ministries. And he is a published author, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and be able to get his book on Amazon. And one that I know that I came down and I spoke at the school. We'll talk a little bit about. Were you shocked? I held on to. I had it in my office, buddy.
I knew you'd still have it. I just didn't expect it to be in your office.
Oh man. Well, I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, you guys are in for a treat here. Want to remind you that you can call in to us. We've got Dan the Man safely ensconced in the traffic-free Chapman Highway studios while we're down here at Studio 1924 on the beautiful, less-traveled Middlebrook Pike. And he's capably manning the phones, and that number is 865-577-4885. Again, 865-577-4885. And if that wasn't enough, we're going to have the text lines open. We've already got a bunch of those text questions. They're available to us. You can reach out. Don't necessarily have to be about what we're talking about tonight, but if you've got a legal question, a concern, something you want to chat about, reach out to us. And that number is 865-556-7218. Again, 865-556-7218. And also reminding you that you can email us all week long. This one's probably the easiest one to remember. It's just the Weekly Law Roundup at gmail.com. So if you can remember the Weekly Law Roundup and Gmail, you're golden. So again, the Weekly Law Roundup at gmail.com. I know you're like, is he ever going to be quiet? But my loquaciousness and my verbosity knows no bounds. So that being said, also want to point out that we are live on Facebook. So not so much Brandon, but me. I have a face for radio, but you can actually get to see us. Brandon consulted with me about his wardrobe, and he dressed accordingly. So he is what he is, and he is glad to be here and just a prince of a fella. But give us a like. Go on there. All of these shows are cached on Facebook. So if you go on the Weekly Law Roundup and watch one or just check us out, you'll know what's upcoming. That's great. But let's talk a little bit about your background first, Brandon. I talked enough. Let's talk about you. So tell me what makes Brandon tick, and tell me about sort of your background in law enforcement and what brought you where you're at today.
Sure. So I actually grew up in a family where my grandmother was the first female police officer in the city of Tempe in Arizona.
Okay.
And so I got that side from her, and then my stepdad was on the other side of the law, so I got to see both sides. And growing up, it gave me kind of an opportunity to evaluate which side do I want to be on. And then I went into the Marine Corps, went to Iraq and Afghanistan, came out, and got a job down in Loudoun County.
Thank you for your service, by the way, and all the men and women that have valiantly served our country. We appreciate those that came back. I mean, as we know, basically all gave some and some gave all. So we do appreciate your service. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
I appreciate that. And then I worked for Loudoun County for a number of years, and then did a short stint as a federal agent and realized that was not for me before I went to Monroe County. Retired in October 2023 from Monroe County and finished my master's degree and realized that I wanted to showcase the stories of the people that are overcoming their past, and I wanted to be able to help people that were previously incarcerated better themselves and become productive members of society.
I think that's excellent. One of the things, ladies and gentlemen, we sometimes get an opportunity to talk sort of off the air and chat with one another. And we were talking about sort of second chances and the fact of we're supposed to be invested in forgiveness and understanding and love for our fellow men and women. And in taking that into account, we chatted a little bit, and I sort of will not by any means profess to be a Bible scholar, but I did do my share of going to church, Sunday school, and obviously various church-related events. And the thing that I looked at Brandon and I said, folks, kind of get that holier now attitude sometime. And I mean, those two fellas up there on the cross next to Jesus weren't necessarily at the time the pillars of society, right?
Amen. And you're exactly right. And there was one perfect person that walked the earth, and it's not you, it's not me.
Absolutely.
And so I try not to judge people on their worst days. I try and give them an opportunity to show me what they're at today.
And I think that's excellent. One of the things we also talked about, and we'll have some shows coming up as we get a little bit closer to Christmas and then over the holidays. Honestly, we take a little bit of time off here at Banks and Jones and the Weekly Law Roundup, spend time with our family and celebrate the season. And these are stories I consider to be of hope. And that being said, folks that did overcome struggles and that they obviously did not live an imperfect life, and some of them very much went to prison. They served extended sentences, but they came back out and they became valuable members of society. And let's talk about this, the opportunity. Why is it important? A lot of times we see, and I don't want to generalize law enforcement because I appreciate the men and women that are serving out there in blue and all of those that are basically first responders, but, it becomes sometimes where I see folks become jaded, right? That, if you will, once in a sort of circumstances, always kind of labeled from that thing. So, how did you kind of divorce yourself from that from a law enforcement perspective with that background?
For me personally, I think it was years in narcotics, because you would see people. In fact, I got a message earlier this week, or maybe it was late last week, from somebody, and they said, "Hey, you and my former partner Jim Wall saved my life by arresting me, and I'm sober now. Now I'm a mentor, and he's doing great with his life." Had the opportunity to talk to him a little bit last week. I'm going to talk to him again some more this week. And the idea of there's good in the world. I mean, I think biblically speaking, we know that there's good in the world and that bad people have the ability to change, right? So we see that in the Bible. And with that same perspective, I know that people make bad decisions. And
I think we've got to have hope, don't we?
absolutely.
I mean, if you don't have hope, and if there's just despair, and if there is no possible light at the end of the tunnel, you just have frustration and folks giving up.
Absolutely. And I think you actually hit the nail on the head there, because the no light at the end of the tunnel actually brings me to an issue that I'm currently working on with Men of Valor. Their chief of staff, Genevieve, and I have been discussing recent legislature that was actually vetoed by the governor, where they wanted to make some offenses where they aren't eligible for parole immediately.
Right.
And I have an issue with that for a number of reasons, but I talked to several murderers last week and interviewed them. They're doing great right now. Talked to several people who were convicted of dealing narcotics, and they are doing great right now. I think that it is not, I think that it's not necessarily what the crime was, because we understand that with any action there's a consequence. But the judge sentenced them knowing when they would be eligible for parole based on the guidelines at that time. If we are changing it now, we are modifying the carrot versus the stick mentality. And what we've done is we've given people that had opportunity and hope and have followed all the rules. Now we're shutting that down for them. And so what is their incentive to continue to try and do better? The system is continuously pushing them down, whereas we as Christians are called to lift them up.
I agree with that, and I see that frustration when I visit the penitentiary, and I say it kind of as a little bit of an aside. Folks will see me post on Facebook and see me discuss things, and I'll be like, I went to see the shut-ins. And, most folks think about that as we grew up in the church family of going to see the men and women that were trapped at home, that they couldn't get out. But likewise, those men and women that are incarcerated, they're trapped in the penitentiary. Yes, it is of their own doing, and, very similar, right? When you look sort of, and I draw these sort of parallels, I mean, pay Caesar what ought be due Caesar,
Yeah.
right? And that means if there's a punishment due, a responsibility to acquiesce to societal judgment and pay that. But then I always think about Bobby Denton, the broadcaster and the in-stadium announcer for the University of Tennessee, who was famous for saying, "Pay these prices and pay no more. Please pay no more." And I think there has to be a finite price. I mean, it can't just be a moving target, and there's got to be some sort of an incentive for good and valid, appropriate behavior.
Absolutely. We in society that are not inside the penitentiary, we have the ability to, as we do good and we do things that we're supposed to do, we are rewarded. So why would we not do that to people inside the penitentiary and then expect them to do what we're needing them to do as a society?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost to the point of being very animalistic, right? If you, for instance, have a mule pulling a cart and you just beat on it and beat on it and beat on it and beat on it, and you don't give it any sort of, sustenance or reward associated with it, you know, I think it's a very narrow-minded approach that you have to understand that, and I think you get a lot of that knee-jerk punishments, where okay, let's increase this, let's increase that punishment. I mean, I've seen since I've been in practice, and now I am getting ready to, well, I guess I'm in my 36 year of practice, uh, just the penalty ranges go up appreciably. And I don't have an issue with regards to the violent crimes and things of that nature, but the drug related offenses and things of that nature, I mean, the rationalization for them, I don't think the outcome is being achieved other than we are having forced warehousing of people.
Absolutely. And the old saying goes that you're trying to empty a river with a teaspoon,
Right.
and you're throwing a bunch of prison time at people, but we're not trying to address the issue. And we know that it costs less money to reform somebody than it does to continue to house them, by over $30,000 per year per person.
I've got a question here, and Matt was kind enough to send one out. And what policy changes do you think are most needed to help address barriers for reentry from prison or incarceration into society?
That's a great question, and I think that that's a two-pronged question. One, you have the government side, which is what are we doing inside of our prisons? Of course, we have public and private prisons here in Tennessee.
We do.
But then also you have the post-incarceration. And I think a great example of somebody that is doing it right post-incarceration would be Men of Valor. They are phenomenal. They actually go inside every prison, every male prison in the state of Tennessee, and they will do a 12-week program. If you complete it, you have the opportunity to apply to their 12-month residential program. And I had the opportunity to sit down with them last week, and they cover all of the basic tenets that I talk about in my book. They cover employment, education, behavioral health, and community engagement.
I'm going to give a shout out to somebody because you mentioned something, employment, and we've had him on the show, and he's told his story, and actually he also commented that he liked my tie. So big hi out there, Bill. But Bill Phillips, a good friend of mine, and we discussed his situation, and he had to visit in the Tennessee Department of Corrections for a period of time. But one of the things that he did whilst in the Tennessee Department of Corrections is he developed an educational program that was sanctioned by the governor. It really took off, and he was training folks to drive tractor trailers and to get their CDL.
That's amazing.
And you sit there and you think about it, but a man or woman that comes out of prison and all they can find is a minimum wage job, if they can find that, and then wonder why they go make bad decisions associated with it. But you give someone an ability to earn a reasonable living, to support themselves, to house themselves, to clothe themselves, to provide for their family. And, anybody that doesn't think that our society is based upon trucking and that goods and services are moved by these tractor trailers, I mean, you're kidding yourself. I mean, that's how we get our food. I mean, look at any grocery store and those trucks backed up to the loading docks. Look at any business. Go to a Walmart, go to a Target, any place that you patronize. We all love Amazon, but the last time I checked, a lot of those Amazons are being driven by. We're not all robotic. I mean, they're driven by people.
Absolutely. And in fact, to your point, you can go out and just look at I-40, see how many tractor trailers are going down the interstate. I mean, goods and services being moved by tractor trailers, it's a phenomenal opportunity. And especially, like you said, if you're looking to make good money and you have a criminal history, absolutely, that's a phenomenal program. And it addresses two of the main points, which are employment and education, because you have to have a certain education to be able to drive a CDL. You have to go to CDL school, right? So behavioral health and community engagement, I think we as a society understand that there's a behavioral health aspect to a lot of these instances. And something that needs to be addressed. But what we don't have is the community engagement. We have one-off volunteers. We have people who donate to Mission of Hope for Christmas but forget that they are open 11 other months out of the year. We have people that want to do good but maybe don't know where they can do good or how to support somebody. Or we have people that are just judging them.
Well, and I always sort of smile about that, especially during the holiday season. Our minister, where I went to church, I grew up in Oak Ridge and then moved over to Farragut. He talked about a lot of it in a good way, trying to explain the fact that, there are 364 other days of the year to do good, and referred to a lot of them as submarine Christians, and that they surfaced on Easter and they surfaced on Christmas, and of course, obviously it's a good time to have an offering.
Absolutely.
Because gonna do that. Well, I'll tell you what, Brandon, we are getting into a lot of good stuff, and I got a lot of good questions for you, but we are allowed to bring this show each and every week through the sponsors. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to patronize these sponsors for their goods and services here on the Weekly Law Roundup. And I'm going to let Dan take us away for a word from these fine folks here on the Weekly Law Roundup on Praise Radio, WJBZ 96.3. Awesome, buddy. It's great.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going good. I mean, I got a bunch of good questions, and we'll get those. And we're still live on Facebook, just reminding you of that. But I think you got great stuff going. I mean, that's good.
It's not me. I'm just trying to be a mouthpiece.
Well, you're a conduit.
I'm trying to be.
The idea is there, and doing that. But I just, the old sayings, and all those sort of teachings, I guess, I had through Bible school and everything like that resonate with me. Judge not lest you be judged,
100%.
And, Judge Asbury, and we talk about this a little bit, he had a set of plaques. He was the judge up in Campbell and Claiborne County, and they were to the side of the bench, and it said, not every man that has not been to prison is a good man. And I'm going to mess it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it said, just as much as that not every man that has been to prison is a bad man.
100%.
And you look at it, you're like, hey, there's some redeeming qualities in everybody. And I always sit there and think about, with an analog watch, even a broken watch is right twice a day.
Analog watch.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's what I tell my family. I'm like, just not an Apple Watch kind of guy. No disparagement. I got an Apple phone.
Yeah, me too.
I don't want an Apple Watch because I got enough stuff.
So I tried it, and the notifications were driving me crazy. So now my son has the Apple Watch, and I don't.
Well, that's good.
But yeah, it's interesting to me because seeing the good that people have, right?
We're coming up on 30 seconds, Jill.
And you just want society to know the good they have. That's why I started the Redemption Project, where I'm putting their stories out on Facebook and YouTube and all that, just to showcase that for them.
It's awesome.
We're drawing back in.
All right, Brandon, I always ask my guests this, right? So you hear that song rolling back in, and we're talking about recidivism, and we're talking about folks that have had a struggle, perhaps been to the penitentiary. Do you know what that bumper music's from?
No,
I'm quite a bit older than you, so I will tell you that on Friday nights I used to watch it, and I know a lot of my folks that are listening, they're like, we know that because we hear this story. It's the Rockford Files.
Oh.
And so Jim Rockford was a private detective in the L.A. area, but Jim Rockford was an ex-con. And, supposedly the storyline goes is that he went to prison, and he subsequently received a gubernatorial pardon, and he was out. But a lot of folks, including Lieutenant Deal, he was a guy that was kind of an antagonist on the program, would always refer to him as an ex-con, with the disparagement. So I thought that kind of tied in with the show there.
Yeah, absolutely.
About that. Plus, when it is my show, I get to choose the bumper music, and it reminds me of my daddy, so I get to do that. But let's talk a little bit, too. We're going to talk about, like, how you measure statistically and everything, but you wrote a book.
I
so did. What, brought you to write the book? And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hold it up so you can kind of see it on the Facebook Live, but it's Reduce Recidivism Now, Reducing Recidivism, a Comprehensive Guide by Brandon Burley. So tell us a little bit about the book, where the folks can get it, and how much it costs, and what they need to do to get their hands on it.
So the book is actually free on Kindle if you have Kindle Unlimited. If you don't and you have a Kindle, I believe it's $3.99 right now, and then it's $9.99 for the paperback. What brought me to write the book is actually seeing the good stories that were coming out of prison and seeing the wins that we were having as a society that weren't being notated, that nobody was realizing. The state of Florida has done an excellent job in bringing faith into their prisons, and it has drastically lowered their numbers. And I felt compelled to put together. It is actually based off of my master's, my capstone, where I talked about what is it that we need to do, and the fifth bullet point in there was supervision and monitoring. And the basis of that book, it's actually made for people to understand that we not only are responsible for employment and education and behavioral health and community engagement, but supervision, monitoring, and rehabilitative services are all necessary to have a well-rounded individual coming out of the penitentiary. And that doesn't mean that you can just do it inside there and then once the gates open, you just let them go free. When we have people that are flat, they are so much less likely, when they are not on probation or parole, they are so much less likely to seek help and services than they are when they are on probation or parole. And whether that's a carrot and a stick, it's not for me to tell you, but I can say that I have seen several men change while on probation and parole, and the number of people that are not on probation or parole that are coming to halfway houses or these rehab centers is smaller than the ones that are. And so I think that by continuing to let them out of prison after they've shown what they have done positively, and then get them to an area that can help with these pillars is necessary.
I can't agree more because, representing folks, through the years and seeing, what works and what doesn't work, by no means do I consider myself an expert. But if folks don't have that hope or that opportunity, they slide right back into their old ways. And to a certain extent, you associate with folks that perhaps don't have a lot of hope, and then you sort of commiserate, and then bad decisions occur from that. You get dependency on both drugs and alcohol, and then we see that dependency spiral into thefts and things of that nature, other crimes, perhaps violent crimes, things of that nature to feed a habit, and it just kind of goes downhill where, if you had provided some sort of an opportunity or a leg up, so to speak, maybe you don't have that. And when you're looking at recidivism, how do you see these studies measure recidivism?
So it depends. You have some, and here's where the skew comes in. Some people measure it 3 years post incarceration, some are 5. I've seen 8 and I've seen 10. The issue, I always try and go to 3. If you're out of prison for 3 years and you have not been rearrested or you have not reoffended, then that is the first milestone that we need to look at. And from that point, we can gauge where we want to go to from there. But I think that when they first leave prison, what we are doing as a society, and I should preface and say, I am not saying that we need to be soft on crime. I am not saying that enforcement should be soft. I don't agree with the broken windows theory, but I do say we can enforce the law. This is not undercutting victims. This is actually helping create less victims. And so I feel the need to clarify that because it gets brought up quite a bit.
I think that's important too, really. And you're saying that from a law enforcement based background. So
Absolutely.
you, in your capacity, you dealt with a lot of victims. And, folks talk about drugs as being victimless crimes. They're not.
No.
Society is the victim of drugs.
Absolutely. Not just society, but then as it boils over, like you articulated a few minutes ago, right? So now to feed that habit, you might have a property crime. You might have a violent crime that comes from it. And it can escalate into so much more. And it's where, in fact, there's a gentleman that I go to church with, part of the Knox County Church Network. His name is TK. He runs the Renew Clinic right here in Knoxville. And he actually overdosed, was on life support, I think it was like 10 days, And when he came out, he found God. Now he runs the Renew Clinic, and they do. I want to say it's mental health and substance abuse, but it is an outpatient program. It's 12 weeks intensive. It's an amazing program. It's in downtown Knoxville, right? It is another instance of how we as a community can band together and help individuals get past the issues that were plaguing them that are causing this crime. So now we are going to have less victims if we have less people committing crimes.
And the reality of it is too, we see people, it's kind of like the folks when they'll talk about drinking and driving, right? They may have drink and drive, get my tongue all tied up, 100 times before they're caught. Well, the same thing goes with property crimes.
Absolutely.
It's not, it does. The percentages are there. There are some men and women that get caught their first time out the gate, but a lot of them have committed innumerable crimes before they're finally caught.
Absolutely.
And so when you look at that, then the total impact on society, if you're able to curb that, stop that, then, society is a better and a safer place for everyone.
Absolutely, agree 100%. In fact, a couple days after my grandfather passed away, his house was broke into, and they stole a bunch of things, including some badges and a gun and some other things. And my family asked, do you have a different feeling about the people that broke in? Do you think that they should be treated differently than how you feel about other offenders? And the answer is no. On an emotional level, of course, I'm upset and I'm sad and disheartened. But from a pragmatic level, I understand that what is causing this issue and that it needs to be addressed and not just penalized.
Let me ask you this. How do we work with, encourage, and seek out employers to deal, as we continue to incarcerate? And the numbers by anybody's counting are going up.
Absolutely.
They're not dropping down. And as we continue to incarcerate, how do we encourage employers and other folks that can provide opportunities to work with those getting out of prison?
So I think there's a couple of great options. One, I think that just honestly, you're going to run out of people that haven't been convicted of a crime eventually, because at this point, we know that per capita, the United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. And we also know that there is going to be an influx and a need of jobs. And regardless of where you fall on the political aisle, we know that there are deportations happening. And to that end, that's creating job vacancies. So employers, one, just realistically are going to need employees. But two, there's plenty of halfway houses out there that are ensuring, hey, we will get them there to work. We will drive them to work. We will do this. We will guarantee that they don't miss work. And when the employers come together and they say, okay, these are actually some of our best employees. These people know what a hard day's work is. They're willing to put in the work. They're willing to put in the effort. We just have to give them a chance. And I think that's the answer.
I will tell folks, and I will echo this to my own employees and all of my myriad of businesses, that the number one basic step to success is showing up.
100%.
Before you even get to, I'm going to be successful at work, step one, you got to show up. And, if we can guarantee employers, not guarantee, maybe encourage employers that, hey, if you hire these folks, they're going to. I know with my commercial car wash, we had a cooperative agreement with the Federal Halfway House, and we would have them there. And to a certain extent, we paid them well, we took care of them, but the halfway house monitored them. If they weren't there, there was a definite consequence. And albeit we sometimes only had the employees for 6 months to 9 months during their stay at the halfway house, we actually had some pretty doggone good employees. We didn't have issues.
And 6 to 9 months, if we're being honest, at a car wash, doesn't sound like it's bad turnover rate.
No.
If we look at these companies with high turnover rates that have transient workers already, why not have somebody that you guarantee is going to show up? They're going to pass a drug test. That they're going to be at work. Why would we not want to do that? Give them a skill, give them a trade, make them a productive member of society, so that way they can lead one of your crews in a couple years.
You know what I like in this a lot too? When I was a kid growing up, right? And again, body art's wonderful. No disparagement toward it. But, the only folks that you saw that had tattoos was like, your Uncle John that had been in the Navy, and he had the big anchor on his forearm or something of that nature. They were not really seen, but now we see more and more, and it's almost getting to where it's the tipping point. There are more people that have body art and tattoos than don't. Well, we're also getting to that situation with regards to folks that have been incarcerated as we continue to criminalize various things. I mean, the expansion in the Tennessee Code annotated in the criminalization of acts is just, exploding at an alarming rate. There's going to be more people that are convicted felons than are not convicted felons. And folks are like, no, that's not it. Look at the numbers. They're there.
Absolutely. And the idea, to circle back to your TCA comment, that we are criminalizing society. We are taking the free out of society. We are making criminals out of people that would not otherwise be criminals. And I'm sure I have some controversial topic or takes on a few of those topics, but another one, the hemp bill, right? So we're going to criminalize hemp. Well, Tennessee Constitution was written on hemp. I just don't see, is it necessary to make something illegal that has been around, it's not causing a problem, and our Constitution was written on it.
Well, and I agree with that. I mean, from the just overall standpoint, when you look at that and you look at the states that have legalized, and then you look at the states that haven't, I mean, it never really works out well. And I mean, you also have attorney generals, right? They each have their own judicial district, some of which are refusing to prosecute it.
Yeah.
And I get that's technically a violation of the law, but the reality, the man or woman that's in that position that decides that their subordinates are not going to prosecute certain crimes, and it's there. I mean, you'll see a lot of those lower level misdemeanors and lower level felonies. I mean, some of them, I mean, when I'm down in court, I'll be talking to the prosecutors and stuff. I'm like, that's pity pat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like, when somebody's playing basketball and you're like, that's a ticky tack foul. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, technically it's a foul, but that's ticky tack. And if we are going to do that, then let's do it all the way across the board. You can't just enforce it in certain areas of town and not enforce it in other areas of town. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's got to be, everybody's got to play by the same rules.
Well, and that circles back to my opinion on broken windows theory. If we're not, the problem is how it was enforced. I understand that we want to stop small crimes so that way we can prevent larger crimes. But the example that I like to give is fix-it tickets and why they are actually still a problem. So, for example, let's say that we have a mother that is got a cracked windshield. She gets stopped by an officer and they give her a fix-it ticket to get her windshield replaced. So she can either get the windshield replaced and then still have to take a day out, go to court, and show the officer, show the judge, whomever it may be, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So she still lost wages. She still had the stress and everything else. These officers work the same beats all the time. You cannot tell me that you don't know who that individual is, and you can't say, hey, have it fixed in a month, I'll swing by. If it's not, I'm going to write you the citation.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the discretion that the officer's got and is expected to use, and maybe that's just seasoning that an officer gets on the street, so to speak. You'll see it. A lot of the rookies that we'll talk about that are full of usually another word for it, but we're on the praise radio. Vim and vigor, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
we know what I am alluding to. But I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, Brandon is just a dynamic guest. Really want to thank him. So we're going to take another break and let Dan lead us into our mid-show break here on the Weekly Law Roundup on Praise 96.3 WJBZ. Awesome. Great.
You said we got some questions. I'm ready for them.
Oh, well, I'll throw you some. Hold on.
Maybe I'm ready for them.
Yeah.
Are they from the students? That's what I need to know.
No, well, I don't know, well, we sort of have a captive audience among my lawyers, and my lawyers all know.
Ah.
By golly, there better be questions. And, yeah.
Oh, somebody just wrote a comment.
No, I like the tie. That was Bill Phillips, who I was talking about, that developed that program. And that program was really, really successful. And I mean, heck fire. I mean, you deal with a lot of these truck drivers. We end up with a lot of these catastrophic accidents, and you have folks that are coming over here and be it, I'm assuming they're legal or semi-legal, but they're out there driving these tractor trailers and they can't even speak English.
100%.
Yeah.
And I've seen an increase in enforcement actions. New Mexico actually just did a really good one where they set up on, I think it was I-10, it may have been 40, but they did an English proficiency exam on the side of the interstate. Every truck had to pull over, and they gave them the English proficiency exam. And I thought that was an amazing opportunity, right?
If you're going to be out there and having to read street signs and follow maps and things of
Yeah.
that nature, even the GPS, I mean,
Yeah.
the GPS can be wrong. I mean, you can't
100%.
just like drive the truck off a cliff because it says that road goes through there.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, I don't know. We'll
Hey,
see.
It's funny. I was
We're
down.
about 30 seconds out.
I was down here earlier because Renew Clinic's right around the corner from me.
Okay.
And so I was over there earlier today, and I always put, no matter where I'm
We're
going, I
coming
put,
back in early. I'm sorry about that.
hey, I know that
Oh,
song.
Opera Pro. You call it out then.
Yeah. Law and Order.
Law and Order. So, we were chatting a little bit on the break, and, you've also expanded out with your journalism career.
I did,
right?
yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that, how you're bringing your knowledge of law enforcement and also the, if you will, criminal justice system and your master's degree to bear in sharing these stories with us throughout East Tennessee.
Yeah, so I started writing for Knox TN Today, and a weekly article where I am highlighting different groups, different nonprofits, different ministries in the Knoxville area that are doing great things, that are bringing out the best in our community. And it is not limited to just people that have been convicted of a crime, but I mean, I'll talk about Mission of Hope. I'll talk about things like the Renew Clinic or Men of Valor that I've previously mentioned, right? And the idea is that to get these stories out. Well, I also started a project called the Redemption Project, and it's on Facebook and YouTube, and it is stories. I sit down with these men and women, and I record their testimony, and they tell me what happened in their life. They tell me where they're at now, how they did it. I mean, it is very intimate. The Facebook versions are a little bit shorter than the YouTube versions.
Tell them, my listeners, how they can find those, because I think that's super important, because that gives hope, because I know my listeners are out there, and it may not be them themselves. It may be their grandchild, it may be their brother, their sister, it may be their great grandchild, but they've got folks out there that are struggling, and they need this to give both them hope as the loved one that they care about their loved one, but also to point their loved one to say, hey, there is a road to redemption.
100%. So you can find the Redemption Project on Facebook. It's just the Redemption Project. It's got a blue banner, and the logo says Redemption Project. Also on YouTube, it's at the Redemption Project. And then if you can't find it any other way, you can find my Facebook profile, which is Brandon Burley. It's got a little blue check mark next to it. Click on it. If you click on my groups, you'll see the Redemption Project. Also, if you know somebody that has overcome any of these issues and they feel like they are willing to share their story, have them reach out to me. I would be happy to share their story. In fact, there's a gentleman I'm going to talk to next week. He runs a barber shop here locally, and he's eager to give his testimony about how he overcame and what he's done. And those are the kind of things I like to share, to give everybody hope and to understand. And if somebody needs help, they can also reach out. If they don't know where to turn, they send me a message. I'll be happy to point you in the right direction.
We got a lot of community resources, and just like what you said, getting the word out, because resources are great, but if folks don't know where to go to access the resource, then you get back to that despair and that same set of circumstances, right?
100%. Just because you want to change doesn't mean you know how to change or where to turn to change.
How do you balance, because I've got this question, honoring victims and respecting victims' rights while also telling stories about rehabilitation and second chances? I mean, where do you go from the balance there?
Absolutely. So, like I said earlier, I am not anti-enforcement. I am pro-enforcement, but the judge is the one that determines what the sentence will be. So when the judge determines what the sentence will be within the range, and they know you will be eligible for probation or parole at this percentage mark, you have the ability to earn certain time off, that is all calculated in. So the victim is getting their pound of flesh, so to speak, when that person is getting punished But at the same time, once they get out, we don't want another victim to be there. So what do? We help them with employment, education, behavioral health, community engagement, and then we don't have another victim. Restorative justice is probably an overused term at this point, and there's some victims that don't want to meet with the offenders, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that the offender shouldn't change so they don't reoffend.
I got a question here relative to this, and basically, Jordan asked, what are the biggest legal and practical barriers people face when reentering society after incarceration?
Gosh, too many to.
Would it just be like a laundry list?
It would absolutely be a laundry list. I think that we don't even consider all of the possible issues. Let me give you a great example. When you leave prison, so the state pays for your health care while you're in prison, okay? You leave, let's say you're over 65. Now you've had a qualifying life event, so your Medicare can change, right? You can get on Medicare when you leave prison. Nobody tells them that when they're leaving. So your 65 and up crowd doesn't know that they can get health insurance as they're leaving. There's nobody there signing them up.
65 is a whole lot younger than it used to be.
Absolutely.
The older I get.
Absolutely. And then you have the under 65 crowd. They leave. They have no health insurance. They go somewhere. They have to find a job. That job has to be able to provide insurance. If not, they are now without health insurance again. So if you have any health issues, behavioral health issues, we're supposed to send them out with a month worth of medication. I'm not going to say that always happens. I'm not going to say it doesn't always happen. But we know that even if you send them out with a month's worth of medication and they had a job waiting for them day one, health insurance wouldn't kick in time for them to get their next dose. They have to find a doctor. They have to get on a plan. They have to be able to pay for the plan. And now you have somebody that needs behavioral health medication that's not getting it, and we can't figure out why they're reoffending.
How do you see the relationship between, if you will, folks that have become institutionalized? They've spent such a long time in prison, incarcerated, where basically their every aspect of their day is effectively just controlled, and then they're back out in society and with even a modicum of freedom and the difficulty to readjust. And I always sit there and I think about the Shawshank Redemption.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot remember the guy's name, but Miles or whatever, and he ends up hanging himself, right?
Yeah.
Because he was so institutionalized when he got back out in society, and it just wasn't, there for him. Very hard for him to function.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a great story. There's a gentleman named Jesse Cresson. He's actually in Virginia. He got a conditional pardon, and he had shot and killed a man when he was young. I think he was 18 or 19 when it happened. He spent almost 20 years in prison, did not know that he was going to get this conditional pardon. They tell him, hey, you're getting ready to be released. He had nothing set up. He talks about, in fact, he and I have talked recently, and he's actually going to talk to my students at Concord as well.
Is he coming to town?
No, he's not coming to town.
Okay.
He's going to do a video for me. He now runs
you need to get him in touch with me. We'll zoom him in on the Weekly Law Roundup.
Absolutely. He's an amazing guy. He runs a project in Virginia now where he goes into courtrooms and he tries to help these offenders as well. But he talks about how the little things, just trying to figure out what was for dinner, or when am I going to get up, or any of these little issues. He's like, it was overwhelming for a while, and it took me a while to kind of reacclimate, which circles me back to my big topic, which is probation and parole for offenders. If we send them to these halfway houses, they are getting that structure. It is slow doses of building reality. Example, Men of Valor, the first 30 days they are out of prison, they do nothing. They get there, they get to go to Walmart, they get to go to Carm, they get some food, they get some clothes. They sit there, they decompress, and they learn, they do biblical studies, and they don't have to worry about getting a job. Then they get them a job, then they're slowly easing them back in, right? When we don't have, if they are not on probation or parole and we are maxing them, and then we send them back out into society, they've now been in prison longer, they are even more institutionalized, and there's likely not somebody there that is going to help them. The common theme I found with most violent offenders that I talk to, they say when they go to these halfway houses, especially ones that are ministries, they say, I was not used to this much love. When my parents were never like this, my family was never this loving, this embracing, this Christian. This is all new to me, and it took me a while. It was really hard to to believe them and understand that they were being true, we have to give them an opportunity to adjust. If you spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years in prison, we can't expect you to come out of prison day one and be this person that we want you to be.
Let me ask you this, and I've got this question here also from Jordan. Why is storytelling such a powerful tool in criminal justice reform, and what impact have you seen with that through the Redemption Project?
So what I've seen from the storytelling aspect, it's interesting. Occasionally I'll put out a story on the Nextdoor app. And the reason I'll do that is because it is hyper localized. And what you see is there's no anonymity. You're not using an anonymous name. You're using your real name. You'll see a lot of support and then one or two detractors that come in there and they're like, no, they need to be punished more severely. But it leads to a more respectful conversation when we're using our real names and when we know that these are our neighbors.
We don't have those keyboard warriors.
100%.
We see that. I mean, I know that when I look on things, when I'm representing, when you look at the Constitution and we have a man or woman charged with a crime, if you read the Constitution and you read the Sixth Amendment, they are referred to as the citizen accused.
Yes.
And they are not referred to as the defendant and or defense counsel. I mean, we, as a matter of rote, say that, but it's a disparaging term because they've not been convicted of anything relative to it. And you'll see these when, perhaps WBR or Knox News or one of the other stations post something and it's, fry that person at the stake, do whatever, and yet the evidence isn't in. And that man or woman may very well be innocent. I mean, in my profession, and I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions, those are the hardest people to represent, the truly innocent, the ones that in your heart of hearts, and you see, if you will, the big machine just kind of grinding them up, and or we will see folks that I've seen come out and then have come to me and I know they would have never gone in. And I don't mean to think that I'm that or my law firm is all that in a bag of chips, but reality of it is, I mean, if you buy a Corvette, it generally outruns a lot of other cars. And, it's not that it's an egalitarian society and everything's going to be equal, but I see a lot of people that are incarcerated just simply through socioeconomic factors, wherein if they'd had a more suitable defense, they wouldn't be there.
Absolutely. Or they would have been there for less time.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think it was Jim Bell that is the one that had told me many, many moons ago.
James Alexander Hamilton Bell, and he is of counsel with my office. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah.
I see we're getting closer to retirement. He deserves it. So one of the things that he said is that I don't agree with innocent until proven guilty because you are assuming they will be proven guilty.
Right.
And fundamentally, I have to say that I agree with that. I would like to think, as a law enforcement officer, I never was wrong in an arrest I made. Statistically speaking, though, I probably was at one point or another. At the same time, just because you were arrested and charged with something, that doesn't mean it was actually the appropriate charge. And I will give major credit to two people, and that's Russell Johnson and Sharm Allen. Both of them will recognize the fact.
Both law school classmates of mine.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I do have to give a third one too. Stephen Hatchett does a really good job. If you want to talk about a straight shooter, that man is a straight shooter. But
head of the state AG's conference now.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
So
excuse me, Monroe County. I apologize. Monroe Bradley. So go ahead.
Yeah. So the idea that the prosecutors, the district attorney generals themselves don't have their finger in every case. So it is incumbent on them to hire good assistant district attorney generals that are looking at these cases and saying, hey, maybe we overcharged, right? Or, ooh, there's a constitutional issue, there's a due process issue here, and we need to address it. I would rather 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man go to prison.
I love that. And you know what we talked about earlier, both wearing analog watches, right?
Yes, sir.
Even a broken watch is right twice a day, ladies and gentlemen. I know you've heard me say that. So we're going to take our 3/4 of an hour break, and we'll be back here on WJBZ Praise 96.3 with our great guest, Brandon Burley. I'm sitting there thinking of his predecessor, and that Steve Crump is the
Yeah.
head of the Attorney General's office. I was like, oh man, Steve's going to kill me. I was talking to him the other day.
What's funny is Steve is against me on this policy issue. He wants them to make it so that way certain crimes they can't parole out as it was when
We've
they were.
got so many 85%ers anyway, and
Yep.
I get it, but if you start turning them all into 100%ers, you take away even that 15% incentive.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, that's kind of insanity. And I mean, if you want them to really just jack up the other number where 85% of 60 is still a long time and
Absolutely.
it's a death sentence for most people.
But we want there to be an incentive, right? So
Right.
a great example, it's actually a horrible example. Great was the wrong word to use, but a man just hung himself in Monroe County. He was convicted of drug charges. As I recall, those drug charges were brought by me and Dalton Reinhardt.
Okay.
He was convicted. He was at 100% and just didn't want to do it, from what I understand. So he hung himself in his cell. And that is not what we want. I want people to get back out and have a life afterwards, be a productive member of society. Like I said, fiscally speaking, any fiscal conservative should say that's what we want as well, because it costs us a lot less money.
Cost us a whole lot more less when they're out than when they're in.
Absolutely.
And, everybody wants to, it's like the stay for pay.
Yes.
We got these paid prisons.
Yeah.
And
We're running up on about 30
I mean,
seconds.
you know the ones that I'm talking about. We got ones called Thunderdome and everything else. I mean, it is a rough area.
We're rolling back in.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with my great guest, Brandon Burley. We were chatting a little bit off the air, if you want to go there. And, of course, Steve Hatchett, and I had misspoke at first because I was speaking about his predecessor, but that would be Monroe, Bradley, Polk, and McMinn.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'm gonna get them all there. So in case Steve goes back and listens to this, don't want to do that. But no, I tell you, I do think that discretion, and it's the same thing that I tell my young lawyers: just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Absolutely.
And if you can't exercise at least a modicum of discretion, you probably ought to seek a different career, because you have great power both as an attorney, as a member of law enforcement. Of course, prosecutors by definition are attorneys. The judges are attorneys. And we have to remember all of those tenets. I don't know if you've ever read the book, and it is a John Grisham, not a novel, but a true story, and it's called An Innocent Man. And it is a fantastic read, and it is about a baseball pitcher that was convicted and ends up being an innocent man. And it is written in the prose and the style that we have come to be accustomed to with John Grisham, but it is a really, really fine read. And I think it bears reading, because you see how somebody can kind of get caught up in the meat grinder. And
Absolutely.
it's awful tough to extricate yourself. Well, let's bounce a couple more of these questions off that we've got. And when we talk about the prosecutors in the courts, right, the judges in the courts, what role do you see prosecutors in courts needing to play in supporting reentry once a sentence has been imposed?
Well, once a sentence has been imposed, I don't think the prosecution plays much of any role. I think that pre-sentence, pre-trial, absolutely, they have a huge role. They have discretion, just like law enforcement has discretion on misdemeanors. That the prosecutors have so much more discretion at their hands. I think they probably have the most discretion in the state, as far as between law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, and the parole board. They probably have the most possible discretion. I think that the prosecutors not every county has a drug court. Not every county has a veterans court. Not every county has a mental health court, right? And bringing that into every county in the state is a huge win. Judge Donaghy does an excellent job down in the 10th with her court. We've got some up here, General Sessions Judge, that does the same thing here in Knox County. And I think that by having these courts, we are breaking off and saying, okay, this person, not that they deserve special or differential treatment, but that they are a different person that requires something different, and we need to treat them differently. If we treat everybody the same, we're going to get the same result.
Let me ask you this, and this is from Bailey. If you could change one thing about the criminal justice system tomorrow, right, that would have an immediate impact on public safety, what would it be and why? And then I'm going to also ask you that same question with the what effect on recidivism. What are those two things that you would change? A, public safety, and B, recidivism.
So as far as public safety goes, the first thing that I would do is allow our law enforcement to have better training. If I could change anything tomorrow, I would give their budgets much better training. We have a huge problem where we are underpaying law enforcement officers and expecting them to be social workers and everything else. And quite frankly, they don't have the training for it. They don't have the experience. And then you run into other issues. I think that by training them better, you're going to get a better result, because when we are focused on things like violent crimes, we have the ability to affect a lot of public safety change when they are so busy. In fact, and I can't tell you who the person was because they told me confidentially, but there is a detective that under this new law, the cyberbullying law, the vast majority of his caseload is 12 and 13-year-old kids where the parents don't want to prosecute, saying, hey, it was a 12-year-old boy. It was a one-off comment. We went to the school looking for help, but the school is now an obligated reporter, so they now have to call the sheriff's office and do a report, or the SRO has to do a report, but we're working under two different definitions of harassment because TCA defines it differently under school law versus under the 39 code, right? So we are now trying to criminalize 12-year-olds, and I reached out to Lowell about it. Lowell
Russell.
Yep. And
Jinx luck.
Yep. And I talked to him, and he's like, hey, there's still discretion. It's just on the back end. And I appreciate the fact that there is still discretion. I wish that we could handle it at the lowest level possible unless somebody requested it.
I think you've got to have that. I know that years ago I defended a case over in Anderson County, and they had at the time adopted the zero discretion with regards to any defined weapon in a school. And I had a young child that the mother had put in a Ziploc bag her X-Acto carving knife and the stuff to do her neckerchief slide for a Brownies or Girl Scout thing, because school there, they would go half a day on Wednesday and then they would go to their Brownie or Girl Scouts meeting. And here you've got this child that's a straight A student that you're going to throw out of school that was not using it in an aggressive manner, but it was zero tolerance. It was that, unmitigable black line, and they'd done it. And I remember addressing the school board over there, and I'm like, this is just such insanity and stupidity that you're going to expel this child. And it just, all reason has just left the building. How can you possibly do that? I mean, albeit it is not necessarily desired, there's got to be what we call in the legal system mens rea. There has to be an intent, right? If a 3-year-old is in the Walmart and while mom's over here processing the stuff, takes a candy bar and puts it in their pocket, that child did not have the mens rea, the mental capacity to do it. Likewise, this child did not take a weapon to school within the definition of the statute, but yet we're going to expel them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that to circle back and answer the second half of that other question, now you come into the recidivism aspect, right? So and to answer their question, what would I change immediately? I would make parole mandatory. Without a shadow of a doubt, every single person would not have the ability to deny parole and go flat. The parole board at some point would have to put them out into a halfway house so that way we can slowly re-enter them into society. And we need to make sure that we are auditing these halfway houses and these different companies and ministries and 501c3s to ensure that they are actually complying. So those would be my two things. Now, to circle back to what you said, I think that when we take a child and we try and criminalize them, what we are doing with the intent was perfect, right? Hey, we want to take away your driver's license if you were committing cyberbullying or harassment. 100% absolutely agree with it. I think, though, that we still have to give the schools and the parents an opportunity.
All right. Well, I tell you what, Brandon, want to thank you for being a great guest. I mean, an hour flies by when you've got such a great guest. And sort of following up on what Brandon said, we're going to have a couple of shows during the holidays. We're going to have Jeremy Ruby on to tell his story of redemption, and also Keith Turner. I think you're going to find those very impactful. Want to remind you to tune in to the Weekly Law Roundup each and every Tuesday night from 6 to 7 here on WJBZ Praise 96.3. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, I need to get some